Before I get started, I'll just show you the reference I'm going to work from today. A member over on Patreon sent me some lovely images of somewhere in New Zealand, I think it is. Really nice. I've cropped it a little bit. There were some trees and bushes and things on the right hand side and down in the foreground, which I thought detracted a bit. And so I've created a composition just by zooming in, essentially. Now, I did a very quick sketch using watercolour pencils. And I really like the way they work, so I thought I'd do a similar thing today, using a sheet of cartridge paper, which I personally prefer for watercolour pencils. When you're dragging the pencil across regular watercolour paper, especially cold press, it can leave little marks that don't really dilute very well, so cartridge paper is good. So I'm going to use an ultramarine, an olive green, that's a raw sienna, that's an ivory black, and this is Van Dyke brown, and that should be more than enough really to get where I want to go. The initial sketch I did was just using the black, and to be honest I quite like the way that looks, but I thought I'd try and introduce a little bit of colour. Now drag the pencil in on its side, so not using the point of the pencil. I don't want to leave any little indentations or anything like that in the paper, so dragging the pencil on sideways like this should eliminate any little unwanted marks. So I'm going to build up just the essence of the scene like this by dragging the pencil across the paper, and then when I come to wet it, it should move around quite nicely. Now I've got my board, my drawing board, it's about 15 degrees, so a little bit shallower angle than I usually have when working. And so just looking at the reference and very lightly at first building up the rough shape of it. Now if you want to get the reference, it will be available as a downloadable version over on Patreon. There's a collection over there called Reference Photos, funnily enough, and you'll be able to save it, and so you can work from that. So working my way around, still just using the black pencil for the start of it anyway, and looking at those shapes. There's some darker areas just where it comes down to meet the water, and so very lightly at first, getting a rough idea of the shape and building up layers as I go. And so still using the pencil on its side. I want this to be quite a loose, sketchy style painting anyway, so I'm not worrying too much about copying the reference exactly. It's more about getting a feel for the atmosphere and some of the light effects. Now the reflections are actually quite dark, so I can put them in pretty much the same as the hills and mountains above. And there are some clouds. Again, I'm not trying to copy exactly what's in the reference, just get a feel and try and build up a sense of movement and light and atmosphere. But I really like working with these watercolour pencils, especially for this sketching style. If I go out and about, or go out in the field somewhere, working on location, I quite often have a small pad of cartridge paper and a few pencils. Don't take the whole box that I've got there, but just a handful of my main colours, and then you can very quickly sketch something out. But let's swap to a Van Dyke brown now, get a little bit of colour in there. I can drag that in over the top of where I've laid in that black. And then when I come to add the water, a little bit of magic happens and it all comes to life and it will mix together on the paper. So again, using the side of the pencil, dragging some colour on. Can lay some of that brown up into the sky as well. And like I said, once you add the water, they really do come to life and a little bit of magic happens, I think. So let's lay some blue in, it's ultramarine. And again, very lightly. Ultramarine's quite a strong one with these pencils for some reason. It always seems to go on very bright. So I don't need to lay that on too thick at all. But I'll lay some of that colour down into the water as well. But like I said a minute ago, like I was saying, once you add the water, it really does come to life and you get a lot of little things happening, and especially using cartridge paper, that's why I like it. You can maybe get some little blooms, little cauliflowers, and it all adds to the effect, I think, of creating quite a spontaneous, very loose, finished painting. And it's a really nice approach, like I said before, working on location. And so I'm just touching some of that olive green into that hill now. And again, I can lay it in over the top of where I've already added some colour. And so I think I'll build up a sense of perspective by having some slightly warmer, more colour in that hill that's closest to us. Having it a little bit bluer off into the distance. So let's lay a little bit of raw sienna in as well. Again, just over the top of everything that's there. And so building up little layers of colour that eventually will all merge together and mix on the paper. Let's go back into the black pencil and let's get some quite strong dark in there. I can lay it on a little bit thicker now. So really just press in a little bit harder with the pencil, not too hard. If you press too hard, then you'll just snap the pencil, but you can get away with a little bit of pressure. They tend to be a tiny little bit softer than regular coloured pencils, so it's not exactly the same as working with a regular pencil. They do have a softness to them. So building up a little bit more colour in the water, tiny little bit stronger value. And so I think that's pretty much enough for this first stage. So now I can grab a brush, it's just a synthetic round brush, and pick up a little bit of water, dry it off a little bit on a piece of towel that I've got, and lay some water in, and you can see instantly it activates the pigment. And they'll start mixing together on the paper. You can drag down, allow that all to run and start mixing together. As you can see, hopefully it's activated where I've added that raw sienna and the Van Dyke brown in there, and it's mixing together with that black and already starting to create little marks and tiny little accidental things happening that you couldn't necessarily do if you were working in regular watercolour. And that's why I quite like it for this sketchy way of working. It's a very nice way to work out a composition as well. And so if you had an idea for a painting, it's quite nice to sketch it out very loosely with the pencils, add the water, see what emerges, and you can get some really good ideas from some of the accidental things that happen. And so really using quite a light touch with the brush. You don't have to really push in to activate the paint. It's just the act of dragging a little bit of water across it instantly activates it. And so essentially I just keep having to go back and reloading my brush with some clean water and drag it across where I've laid down that colour. So let's start working on some of these hills a little bit further away. And I can touch all of it together. With it being cartridge paper, it dries quite quickly. But it's quite a nice way to build up lots of little effects. And it creates little areas of texture without having to do too much. So let's activate that paint all the way across. You can see it's built up a sense of perspective and distance, and I've got some shape and some form in those hills. Let's clean the brush again, drag all the way down now. And so getting some really interesting little effects happening. And let's bring in quite a lot of water across this sky. I want this to start running down and hopefully join in with the hills and the mountains. So quite a lot of water in the brush. Bring it down vertically. I can bring it down over the top of those hills. Again, just dragging that down. Again, quite a lot of water. And quite often the more water you introduce, the more accidental things start happening. Soften a few of those little edges. Encourage some of this paint to move around. Now it's starting to take shape, and I could possibly leave it as it is, but I'll go back in, and where the paper's wet, you can work back in with the pencil. And as the pencil gets a little bit wetter, it will start activating itself. So if I drag that in where that's quite wet on here, and there the paint has started to activate, and I can get some really quite dark marks in there now, just by working into the water that's still remaining in the paper. And again, it's a really nice way of building up a lot of accidental marks, little shapes. So still using the pencil on its side and dragging it across. And some areas are drier than others, so I'll get little dry marks and then little wet marks when the paint activates. Let's swap colour. Let's pick up the ultramarine and do the same sort of thing. So dragging it across, and it'll activate in places. And areas where it's dry, I'll get a little hard mark. I can swap between the blue and the black, building up little areas of texture and just playing around really with the composition. That's why it's such a nice way to sketch like this, not having any pressure or any sort of, not having any finished painting in mind as such, just working and seeing what emerges. It's really quite a nice, free and loose way to work. And occasionally the pencil will activate like it did just there, and I've got really quite a dark mark Don't necessarily want that there, so I can pick up the brush again. And then I can soften that and drag it around. I can soften some of the little bits of pencil that I've just put in. And so really building up lots of little areas of texture, little accidental things all over the piece of paper. And like I said, it's really great for trying to work out a composition. You don't have to worry about setting your paints up. You don't have to worry about wasting expensive paper either. Like I said, it's just a piece of cartridge paper, so pretty cheap. It's just regular sketchbook cartridge paper. I can also use the mist bottle if I want to try and get some little runs happening. And so it's a real nice crossover between paint and pencil. So add a little bit of dark into that sky. I can spray it with a bottle and you can see it instantly activates and I get lots of little runs happening. Let's see if we can create quite an interesting cloud shape. So now I'm kind of making this up as I go along, trying to tie everything together, trying to make an interesting composition anyway. It might not work out, but let's see what happens. So again, very lightly dragging some pencil in. I can also activate it with the brush as well. So moving the brush around, encouraging the paint and the water to move about. Back in again, a little bit more mist bottle. See if we can get this to move down and come all the way across the hills. Might join together. I want to make sure I don't cover up too much of that light I've got there though. I think that's what's keeping the painting alive really, is by keeping a little bit of that white paper behind. But I've got a very interesting cloud shape that's pretty much appeared on its own. So let's pick up the pencil again. Can drag some in across the bottom of the paper now. Let's get some little hard marks. Try and suggest some reflection, maybe a little bit of movement on the water. But the whole time keeping very loose with it. I don't want to really fall into that trap of tightening up too much and trying to do too much with it. So just laying some colour in, drag it around with a brush, allow things to happen on their own as well. Let's try and close that right hand side off, push the eye more into the middle where I've left some little white highlights on the water. I think we're starting to take shape now. It's getting there, but that water's running down a little bit too much, I think, through that hill. So let's grab a piece of paper towel. Let's just dry some of that before it washes it away too much. Let's go back in, a few more little marks here and there. And the paper's quite wet now, and the pencil's still a tiny little bit wet, so it's actually quite active. So I can really drag that on and get some quite deep, strong dark in there. That helps to build up that area and add a sense of perspective as well. Pushes the hills on the right, pushes them off more into the distance. I want to make sure I don't cover up all of that little suggestion of colour that's in there. Though you can still see that green and brown and little bits of raw sienna glowing through there. So a few little marks across, a few little slightly harder marks. And I think we're almost there. Let's just soften some of that in the distance. Not too many hard edges in the distance really. Tie these two shapes together. Building up a little sense of light and shadow. And again, let's soften some of these areas in this cloud. Don't want too many hard edges up there. Let's create a tiny little bit of separation between the water and the land. Just a little bit of a dark mark across there. Let's add a little bit more colour in there. Got the raw sienna. Drag some of that down into the water. You can get a nice little bit of colour going across there as well. Let's drag some raw sienna all the way across, down at the bottom. Raw sienna and ultramarine and black essentially always a really nice colour combination. And I think we're pretty much done. Let's drop a little bit of that blue in as well. Now I think I'm reaching that stage where I'm thinking, what else can I add? So more often than not, it's the best time to stop. Okay, that's the painting or the sketch finished. I've worked out quite a strong composition from the reference photograph, but by keeping it very loose and using the pencils and the spray bottle and the brush and everything like that and allowing it all to move around, got loads of little accidental marks, not stuck too rigidly to the reference, which I always think's a good idea anyway. If you try and tighten up and copy every element in a photograph, it's where you can come unstuck. So keep it loose and work around with the composition, play around with the shapes and the colour, and you should build up quite a good strong sketch that you can take on and you can work up into a larger piece or a finished watercolour painting or whatever you want to do with that. But it's quite a nice way to start an idea, is to work like this. But anyway, that's the demo completed. You can check me out on Patreon, and also I've got a Facebook group which is for members on Patreon and YouTube subscribers and everyone else that wants to join really. So check that out over on Facebook. And anyway, I'll see you in the next demo. Thanks for watching everybody. Cheers.